So before I start this video, I want to make sure that people understand this and that YouTube understands this. I am briefly going to talk about the use of dehumanization of an enemy in combat. Okay? I am not glorifying violence or encouraging violence. This video is for educational purposes, and I am speaking as a self-defense expert. That is how I am speaking. I am not encouraging any type of violence, okay? Now, I'm going to get into this. So, when I was actively teaching martial arts, which I'm most likely going to go back into doing very soon, all martial arts instructors that are good martial arts instructors teach their students how to dehumanize the attacker. You have to understand, if somebody is trying to hurt you or assault you or do anything to you, they are no longer a human. That is not your concern. They do not have a family. Who cares if they have a family? They do not have morals. If they did have morals, they wouldn't be attacking you. All that you have to worry about is neutralizing that attacker. Now, in military theory and in, war, whole countries dehumanize other whole countries. And luckily, it's getting harder to do that with access to social media, okay? But it's still a thing. And this is what Gangstalkers do, like the Gay Wave Boys, like Fat Mam, like Leaf. Leaf literally told Adonis to not speak to me because I might think I am a people, okay? So what the goal is to dehumanize the enemy. That's why they throw out these insults, and I'm going to get into this. They'll try and make the public believe that their enemy is a pedophile when they're not a pedophile. They'll try to make the public believe that their enemy is a criminal when they're not a criminal. The reason they do this is to dehumanize them, to justify the acts that are being taken against them, such as in my case, there have been acts of harassment, both online and in real life. My vehicle's tire has been slashed, and there has also been a smear campaign against me and a lot of false reports to law enforcement and things of that nature. This is and they have also contacted a medical provider of mine to falsify fake outrage and fake fear for somebody, and this is done to dehumanize me in the eyes of those around me. This is a common tactic to justify harming someone. I know this firsthand as a martial arts instructor. We do this in martial arts to teach people that it's okay to basically to attack back. When somebody attacks you, it's okay to attack them back. You have to understand, the methods that are used in martial arts are very devastating methods. You are not going to jam your thumbs into the eye sockets of somebody that you see as a human. You are not going to rip at the trachea of somebody that you think is a human. Okay? You are not. Most people will not, unless they are psychotic or sociopathic or psychopathic. Normal people do not want to hurt other people. Okay? That's why you have to dehumanize the attacker or the enemy. That is why gangstalkers dehumanize the people that they victimize. That is why serial killers dehumanize the people they victimize. That is why serial killers pick people that are considered less than human by the public, such as sex workers and things like that. This is common. If you've ever... See, I majored in criminal justice, so if you've ever studied criminology, it's very easy to understand why aggressive predatory people, such as those that are online aggressively going after people like Mary, a defenseless mentally ill woman, have to dehumanize her with many of the same things that they've done to me, except even more so in some instances. For example, with Mary, They've accused her of a murder she did not commit, okay, to dehumanize her, to make her less than human in the eyes of those that would it justifies them harming her. The other thing that they have done is they have justified by falsely accusing her of acts of pedophilia that she never committed, just like they accused me of acts of pedophilia that I never committed. And that's the problem. So, dehumanizing the enemy involves denying the enemy's humanity by negating in the enemy the characteristics normally associated with human beings, such as morality and compassion, and instead associating the enemy with acts of evil and depravity that merit forceful action and retaliation. Dehumanizing an enemy during conflict forms part of the psychological offensive of war, and the image created of the enemy plays an important role in enabling soldiers to fight and kill as required during war, and is encouraging civilians to support the actions of war and to maintain their enthusiasm for it as the casualty figures start to rise. The fear of what will happen if a demonized enemy is not overcome, or at least pushed back or contained, becomes a tool to justify why. So these gangstalkers like to portray themselves as vigilantes. So what's going on here is they try to dehumanize, through moral outrage, their victims, which, like me and Mary and other people, they try to dehumanize us and portray us as evil people to justify what they do to us. And this is the role of dehumanization and moral outrage and retributive justice. Now, the thing is, what you have to understand, Mary and I didn't do anything, but it's important for them to portray us as though we did, so that they can justify doing things like they did to me, like slashing my tire, harassing me, and dehumanizing me further. Because you don't do these things to people. You do them to people that you call subhuman. And that was what, if you remember, that's actually what Leaf called Mary, was a subhuman, which is literal dehumanization of someone. Okay? So, when innocents are intentionally harmed, people are motivated to see the offenders get their just deserts. The severity of the punishment they seek is driven by the perceived magnitude of the harm and moral outrage. The present research extended this model of retributive justice by incorporating the role of offender dehumanization in 3 experiments relying on the survey methodology. In Australia and the United States, participants read about different crimes that varied by type: child molestation, violent, or white collar, or severity. The findings demonstrated that both moral outrage and dehumanization predicted punishment independently of the effects of the crime type or crime severity. Both moral outrage and dehumanization mediated the relationship between perceived crime and severity of punishment. These findings highlight the role of offender dehumanization in the punishment decisions and extend our understanding of processes implicated in retributive justice. Okay, when criminal behavior brings harm, okay, that's just recapping. Efforts to understand psychological responses to criminal behavior have generated a large body of knowledge within the fields of social cognition and law. For example, when criminal behavior is seen as intentional, perpetrators are judged as more culpable, responsible, and blameworthy, and are punished more severely in these cases. Remember how they kept trying to convince people that I was stalking a woman that I was concerned about? That was necessary to dehumanize me, to begin the justification of the harassment and smear campaign. The smear campaign was a lot of false accusations about things that I didn't do, trying to convince the public that I did things that I didn't do. In these cases, when mitigating factors are scarce and crimes are viewed as intentional, people tend to endorse retributive forms of punishment, such as slashing my tire, okay, and are highly sensitive to harm done in forming judgments about punishment severity. This just deserts approach to punishment is grounded on the belief that offenders should be punished proportionately to the moral offensiveness and harmfulness of their crimes. Any future consequences of punishment become irrelevant. such as rehabilitation, yada yada. An important, now I don't believe in rehabilitation, I'm going to get into that later. An important factor in translating perceptions of harmfulness into recommendations for harsh punishment and moral outrage that people feel in response to criminal acts. People respond to moral transgressions with gut-level emotional responses. Okay? Now, what I want people to understand, look at the way they are harassing Mary. And I'm going to show this. Look at the way they're harassing Mary over her deceased, disabled brother. If people should be having outrage over anything, it should be the way they're harassing this woman, this mentally ill woman, over the loss of her deceased, disabled brother that had cerebral palsy due to the father's abuse of her pregnant mother. This woman has had a horrible life, and all they do is try to make it more horrible to capitalize on it. And the way they do that is to justify the attacks on this woman by dehumanizing her. Cross-cultural evidence highlights that feelings of contempt, anger, and disgust are specifically associated with these third-party responses to moral transgressions, providing empirical support for the role of moral outrage and punishment. Carl Smith found that moral outrage mediated the effects of perceived harm on the severity of recommended punishment. Feelings of moral outrage play an important role in determining punishment severity, but other factors may also play a role. In the current research we explore, blah, blah, blah. American offenders suggest an association between a portrayal of black... Okay, I'm not going to say that out loud. A series of studies investigating reactions to sex offenders provided some initial support for these possibilities. This research found that likening sex offenders to animals was positively correlated with the endorsement of harsher punishment. So they purposely, see, that's Adonis trying to harass me, they purposely try to dehumanize sex offenders. Now, what's funny with sex offenders can be anything from an actual sex offender that's a real freak, okay? Somebody that's kind of like I suspect Adonis Paul is, and Adonis Paul is projecting, or it can be somebody like, say you're at a party and you meet a girl and it turns out that, and this actually did happen to a friend of mine, and nothing happened to him, but it almost did. But say you're at a party and you meet someone and it turns out that they're underage. Next thing you know, everything's perfectly whatever. They lied to you. They showed you a fake ID. Next thing you know, their parents are pressing charges on the person, and then the person's in trouble. Okay, now that can happen, and it does happen, and then that person is labeled for the rest of their life as a sex offender. Now, what's horrible about that is the person, through no fault of their own, was taken advantage of by somebody that was a minor, but the minor can't take advantage of somebody because of the way the laws are. So that's how that happens. Okay, so there could be something like that, or it could be a real sex offender. It could be somebody that actually forcibly raped somebody, or something of that nature. Doesn't have to be. It can be anything. It could be somebody that, for example, it could be a complete misunderstanding where somebody accidentally brushed up against somebody on a bus, but in this hyper crazy world of nuttiness, okay, people take everything as a form of harassment or abuse or whatever, and then what do you know, a weird judge found the person guilty of sexual harassment because they accidentally brushed up against somebody on the subway. I mean, it really is a hyper litigious world that we're living in these days. So, so equating them with animals encourages more violent treatments such as castration. I'm not exactly against castration of sex offenders. So, I mean, that's the thing, is you have to at least not chemical castration, or vasectomies or things of that nature. They argue that both moral outrage and dehumanization of offenders may arise in response to morally reprehensible behavior, and that both may independently influence punishment severity. Moreover, these two responses to criminal behaviors may be related to one another. Previous work suggests that moral emotions may be linked to dehumanization in a variety of ways. Viewing others as less than human or less human reduces feelings of guilt and harm doers and reduces reparations for past wrongdoings. Okay, so viewing others as less than human, like I'm saying, that's what they do. They try to portray Mary and I as less than human. So viewing others as less than human reduces feelings of guilt in harm doers. Viewing others as less than human reduces feelings of guilt in harm doers. Viewing others as less than human reduces feeling of guilt in harm doers. You'll remember that during the Tate LaBianca murders, they dehumanized their victims and wrote pig on the wall in the blood of their victims. Now, I believe in the innocence of Charles Manson. I do. I do not believe in the innocence of Tex Watson. I do not believe in the innocence of the people that committed the crimes. However, what you need to know, what did they do? They dehumanized the bourgeois that they murdered. Understand? They were dehumanizing their victims. This prior research indicates a link between dehumanization and self-focused emotional responses to our own immoral actions. So this prior research indicates a link between dehumanization and self-focused emotional responses to our own immoral actions, guilt and shame. Guilt and shame. So while you dehumanize, you justify what you've done, relieving yourself of guilt and shame, which is why the Gangstalkers dehumanize their victims. In the current studies, we examine the untested notion that experiencing moral outrage, disgust, anger, and contempt in response to others' immoral actions would be associated with reduced perceptions of their humanity. And this way, Okay, examine dehumanization, desire morally, we examine dehumanization. Indirect evidence for a positive link between moral outrage and dehumanization comes from research showing that feelings of disgust are associated with dehumanization of others. Now, I grew up in a very Protestant family. So one of the things is the dehumanization of Catholicism and people that would adhere to Catholicism. Okay? That's a common theme. Okay? For instance, people high in disgust sensitivity dehumanize immigrants to... Now, that's a common thing. They dehumanize immigrants to a greater extent than those low in disgust sensitivity. Other work has demonstrated that viewing members of marginalized outgroups known to elicit disgust, the homeless, drug addicts. Notice how Adonis tries to dehumanize Mary by dehumanizing the homeless and dehumanizing drug addicts and things of that nature. They constantly harass Mary over her former homelessness, and they call her a drug addict for using marijuana, which is something all of these gangstalkers promote, and even try to sell a synthetic form of marijuana on their programs. That's how they make money, is by selling a synthetic form of marijuana. And it does not influence activation in the medial prefrontal cortex. The medial prefrontal cortex is broadly implicated in social cognition. For instance, this region is typically activated when viewing people, but not objects. Lack of activation. So what it shows is that when you dehumanize somebody, you see them as an object. Moreover, viewing these marginalized outgroup members increased activation in the insula and amygdala in neural pattern consistent with experiencing disgust. Together, this work indicates that the emotion of disgust may be associated with perceiving others as less human. However, whether emotional reactions to criminal behavior are associated with dehumanized perceptions of perpetrators and whether this dehumanization is related to punishment severity remain empirical questions. The current studies investigated the association between moral outrage and dehumanization and retributive justice. When predicted that moral outrage and dehumanization would co-vary in response to criminal behavior, and this would be evident across a range of crimes and independent of crime severity. Consistent with findings, extending this work consistent with our focus on dehumanization, we also predicted that that offender dehumanization would predict punishment severity, and that this would occur independently of any objects associated with moral outrage. We also predicted that consistent with Carl's and effects of perceived harmfulness, study 1, let's go down to the results. I don't feel like just reading and reading and reading. Okay, moral outrage, a one-way ANOVA revealed a significant effect of crime type on each of the moral outrage emotions: disgust, anger, and contempt. Revealed that child molestation crimes produce most anger, contempt, and disgust. This is why they try to portray people as pedophiles. Despite a lack of evidence, they try to portray people as pedophiles to elicit anger, contempt, and disgust, to justify acts of violence against them, to justify slashing their tire, to justify harassment of them, and to justify further dehumanization of them. Violent crimes also produce more disgust than white-collar crimes. Dehumanization principal components analysis indicated that the measure of dehumanization formed a single-factor solution explaining 38.45% of the variance, with all items loading above to 45. Okay, the two dimensions of humanness have been examined separately in other work for a review. However, when examining person perception within the context of harmful behavior, these two dimensions consistently either form single dimensions. Both dimensions show similar patterns. This lack of differentiation suggests that perceptions of dehumanization may operate somewhat differently when they arise in response to harmful behavior of individuals rather than in judgments of groups. Thus, a single dehumanization scale was constructed, blah, 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 correlates of dehumanization for the entire sample. All of the moral outrage emotions were positively associated with dehumanization. Okay, so when you dehumanize somebody, these moral outrage emotions, oh my God, they're a horrible person, they did this, they did that, it's associated with dehumanization. I'm going to move on because I don't feel like going through every single one of these, but you can follow the link in the description. The role of dehumanization and attitudes towards social exclusion and rehabilitation of sex offenders. Again, this is why they support calling people pedophiles. It's the worst thing you can do. This is also why they call people racists, and I'm going to get into that in a second. They examine the role of dehumanization in people's attitudes towards rehabilitation of sex offenders in Study 1. The more participants dehumanize sex offenders, the less they supported their rehabilitation, and the longer the sentences they recommended. In Study 2, the more participants dehumanize sex offenders, the more likely they were to support their exclusion from society. In Study 3, the more participants dehumanize sex offenders, the more they supported their violent ill treatment, which justifies attacking them or vandalizing their property or things of that nature. In Study 4, within the sample of correctional staff, good quality contact with sex offenders was related as less dehumanization and more support for rehabilitation. Mediation analysis indicated that the relationship between quality of contact and support of rehabilitation was mediated via dehumanization. I'm a firm believer that the best form of rehabilitation for any crime is strict punishment. I am a firm believer in the Pennsylvania system, the Quaker system. So I'm not a big fan of rehabilitation, mostly because I don't think it works. I don't think there's any real evidence that rehabilitation really does work. But I'm going to move on and show something else. So a lot of what they try to say about me is that I'm a racist, I'm a Nazi. People will see quickly that I'm not a Nazi. I may have had former beliefs, and this is what's funny about that. I have friends all over the political spectrum. A lot of my friends actually are feminists. I have friends that are liberal feminists. I have friends that are communists. I have friends that are feminists that have been my friends for upwards of 20 years. Female feminists, women that are feminists that have been my friends for upwards of 20 years. I've always been somebody that likes to seek understanding. I don't like to seek closed-mindedness. I think that a lot of people have good ideas. I think that there's a need to understand where other people are coming from, whether it's from a religious point of view or whether it's from a political point of view. And yes, I was a National Socialist. I think people also have this, because they dehumanize National Socialists, they seem to not understand that many that are National Socialists or many that adhere to these ideologies, with the exception of people that have adopted this dehumanization idea. They dehumanize others like the alt-right does. But people that were old-time American National Socialists, they're not as closed-minded as people think they are, either politically. They're not closed-minded towards race like people think they are. A lot of them are not really what people think they are. They just have specific political views based on their own experiences in life. But what it is people try to dehumanize them, and also because of Antifa and because of the alt-right, and the alt-right dehumanizing people, and the alt-right justifying the way they talk about people like immigrants and things like that, it allows people like Antifa and BLM to justify attacking people that they just call Nazis. Many of the people they attack are not Nazis, okay? They're just people. They're just people. And we're going to get into that, and I'm going to show you how dehumanizing somebody by calling them a Nazi is a justification for acting against them with violence, despite the fact that the only thing they're doing is expressing their views. So you are justifying attacking a person, not because they've done anything violent or anything like that, but because they have specific political points of view.
Is it okay to punch a Nazi?
I mean, we did go to war against them.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
This week's top story. If you see a Nazi, punch a Nazi.
Liberals should not be raving about this.
The new segment would like to call up a Nazi.
My 90-year-old uncle, if he was alive, would have punched that son of a bitch in the face. I would have had his back.
It was a hotly debated question for months after video of white nationalist Richard Spencer getting punched in the middle of an interview on the day of Donald Trump's inauguration went viral and inspired countless remixes. But the question was never really just about Nazis. It was about the acceptability of political violence. And in the following year, the question came up again and again as several high-profile political protests turned violent, including one on the campus of UC Berkeley. We visited Berkeley about a year after that protest turned riot to ask students whether punching Nazis or other deplorables is ever okay.
They want to punch the Nazi. I'm not going to judge.
It depends on what you define as a Nazi.
The people whose words create a culture that sort of ratifies violence against a certain group are punchable.
On February 1st, 2017, the nation watched the University of California.
So what they're saying is that what that gentleman just said is it's okay to ratify violence against another group that ratifies violence. So he is justifying political violence against a person that is not acting violently.
Berkeley burn as masked members of the far-left group Antifa lit fires, threw safety barriers through store windows, physically attacked people and threw rocks at the police. The protests turned riots were sparked by the arrival of right-wing provocateur Milo Yiannopoulos, invited to campus by a conservative student group.
The fact that a homosexual Jewish Catholic is considered far-right is beyond my ability to comprehend, honestly. He's a troll, he's a phony, he's a fake, and he's a provocateur.
President Trump helped ignite the controversy by tweeting a threat to pull federal funding from Berkeley. Protests continued throughout the rest of the year as more conservative speakers were drawn to the Berkeley campus. The students we talked to said that the violence was carried out almost entirely by outsiders.
A lot of outside media comes in and sees, something very sensationalist,
So
stuff on.
this is a woman saying that she's not going to judge somebody that punches a person for political reasons, but she's claiming that this all happened by outside people. Yet she's a student of Berkeley that seems to have no problem if she would have to participate in attacking somebody politically. So that's, how can you judge these people? How can you judge them, you know what I'm saying?
Fire in the middle of Sproul Plaza where we're standing and takes this to represent that young people are not interested in civil discourse, which is not true.
She just stated she wasn't interested in civil discourse. She stated that she thought it was okay to punch people for their political points of view at the beginning of this video.
Specifically, if you go back to the Milo riots, one of the things that really annoys me about all of this is that Berkeley students are blamed for all of the damage that happened to our campus.
There's just a small group of like people, Antifa, you've probably heard of them, and they just come up here, mess everything up, we get paid blames for it, and then all the students are just like, that sucks.
Antifa, short for anti-fascist, is a decentralized movement that rejects the tactic of nonviolence and vows to fight whatever or whomever it identifies as fascist by any means necessary.
Are you understanding that? They simply call people Nazi or fascist as a means of dehumanizing them, or racist. There's also anti-racist action, which is sort of an offshoot of Antifa. So you have to understand that what they do is they use this perception of racism to justify attacking people.
They are taking advantage of the Berkeley campus and the Berkeley students and the Berkeley people, and we're getting a rap for something that's not associated necessarily with us.
Pretty much resorting to this force, this violence, pepper spraying just Trump supporters who did nothing other than express their political opinions. That's not what we should be doing at all.
Now, I agree with that gentleman. There is no reason to attack somebody that's simply expressing their political opinion, meaning that if you support Trump, that is not a grounds to be sprayed in the face with pepper spray by a member of Antifa simply for your political point of view.
And I want to say that that's not what Antifa should be doing either.
Most of the students we spoke to condemned the group and its tactics, but they were also reluctant to condemn political violence altogether.
I personally wouldn't throw a stone through a window, but I would never criticize the psyche of someone who does.
I think it's...
You hear that? She would not criticize the psyche of somebody that would commit an act of political violence.
Hard for there to be very big change without some sort of violent aspect to it, whether that's property destruction or human life, which is like the sad reality that we live in.
So this person is encouraging destruction of property and murder. So this is a UC Berkeley student justifying the destruction of property and murder because he does not believe that social change can occur without these things. So this is what people are being indoctrinated with in universities, and they're being encouraged through the dehumanization of their enemies.
Speech can be considered violence. Inviting people like Milo Yiannopoulos creates...
Notice that they're trying to basically portray speech as violence now. So they're trying to portray speech as violence, which is an absurdity. So, yeah.
An unsafe environment for the people that he is speaking against. Property damage is absolutely justifiable. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said that...
Stating that the justification of property is justifiable. That's the justification of the destruction of private property and public property. This person's quoting Martin Luther King, who was known to be an avowed communist.
Riots are the language of the voiceless.
To kind of harken back to what MLK said, a way for the unheard to make their voices amplified.
Notice how many people quote Martin Luther King. That's really what you need to pay attention to. People have this bizarre, they put Martin Luther King on a pedestal when really he was not the great person people think he was. He was a womanizer himself. There's a lot of evidence to support that, especially if you read the FBI file.
A riot is the language of the unheard.
That famous quote has been widely misinterpreted. King wasn't condoning riots. He was saying that in response to racial...
So now you have these so-called conservatives quoting Martin. They go back and forth. I'm a better liberal than you are. I'm a better liberal than you are. This is absolutely ridiculous. Stop quoting an avowed anti-American communist.
Oppression, it was understandable though counterproductive, and that nonviolent protest is the only path to social change.
I think for the Negro to turn to violence would be both impractical and immoral.
Putting aside the question of whether or not preemptive political violence is moral, is it actually effective? In Why Civil Resistance Works, political scientists Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan compared violent and nonviolent movements throughout history and found that the nonviolent ones were more than twice as effective at achieving their goals. Princeton researcher Omer Wasow found that the nonviolent protests of the early civil rights...
Many people diss me for this when I try and explain to people that, okay, people that are disenfranchised. Right now, the white working poor are a very disenfranchised group in the United States that are openly discriminated against by law with things like affirmative action. And I keep explaining to people that you don't want to join nonsense like the alt-right. What you want to do is you want to show that this is a civil rights issue, that your civil rights are being violated, and nobody's listening to me because they're so seduced by this alt-right nonsense. The alt-right is bullshit. You need to start showing, you need to ally yourself with the left. You need to join the Democratic Party, and you need to show that you are being victimized by society, by affirmative action. Affirmative action is a means of victimization of the white working poor. But nobody wants to see that. What they want to do is they want to ally themselves with the alt-right, and they want to keep pushing this issue when this is a social justice issue. This is a social justice issue for the white working poor, but nobody wants to see that. Nobody wants to do that because they don't want to accept the mantle of victimhood, but they really need to, and they really need to ally themselves with the left and actually show that this is a social justice, it's a social justice issue. This is not, there's no justification to join the alt-right, and there's no reason to be dissing people for social justice when social justice is your key to victory.
Its movement changed minds, while the left-wing riots in the late 1960s likely tipped the presidential election in favor of Richard Nixon. And if Antifa members still want to punch so-called Nazis, they should pay attention to the work of historian Lori Marhofer, who studies real Nazis and says the party often rallied close to its adversaries in order to provoke them, drawing a violent reaction.
What's funny about that, what people don't understand, is Antifa was created by the USSR to attack and try and keep people that would vote for National Socialists, try to keep them from voting. They were designed for voter intimidation, quite like the Black Panther Party was doing in Philadelphia, and I might show that just to give an idea of what that was about.
That swayed public opinion in its favor. Today's provocateurs are nothing like Adolf Hitler, but there's no doubt that Milo Yiannopoulos chooses to come to places like Berkeley for a reason.
You hear it a lot, that you're intentionally trying to provoke the kind of response.
Well, the point is a university like Berkeley should invite open and free political discourse. They should invite it. I hate Milo Yiannopoulos. I think he is a liar. I think that he's one of the main people that has caused Trump-publicanism to destroy conservatism in the United States. But the point is, he has a right to speak, okay? And the so-called liberal universities that promote academic freedom should be inviting academic freedom, should be inviting political discourse, should be inviting freedom of discourse.
As we saw last night.
Well, my response is, so what? Who cares?
Exactly.
I'm an entertainer. I'm a performer.
I personally think that the Milo protests caught on so much fire because of the sheer intensity of the people protesting against him.
It sounds like you're saying the best way to deal with someone like Milo is to ignore him.
Well, that's what you do with trolls, right?
Don't feed the trolls.
Feed the trolls. We got played.
The response to the assault on Richard Spencer was hardly the only instance of a blasé media response to violence. The brutal attack on Senator Rand Paul, which left him with bruised lungs and 6 broken ribs, was met with jokes and suggestions that he had it coming because of his libertarian...
To explain Rand Paul, see, this is one of the most dangerous things. Now libertarians are being considered to be National Socialists. And Rand Paul is not like some boogaloo boy or something. He is a regular conservative libertarian, meaning he's a Republican that sways to the libertarian side, but he's more so a run-of-the-mill conservative, limited government conservative.
views. Is it justifiable to act violently towards someone who comes to campus and is advocating against universal health care?
I don't think I'd punch that person.
Yeah. Is it okay for someone else to?
I wouldn't encourage it.
Notice that he's against attacking somebody that supports something that he supports and something that I support, which is universal health care. But he's for people that have the reverse political view as him. Now, I'm going to move on. So, as I noted, Antifa was designed as a means of voter intimidation. During the 2008 election, where John McCain was running against Barack Obama, the new Black Panther Party in Philadelphia also participated in voter intimidation by dehumanizing their enemies, which were white Americans. And this is what happened.
John McCain against Barack Obama.
There's a guy with the Billy Club right here.
Video recorded here by a poll watcher went viral and has since been associated with voter intimidation. But that's not the full story.
And he was not a police officer. He was not proper security. He was a member of the new Black Panther Party.
That was November 4, 2008, to be exact. Stephen Morse, then a University of Pennsylvania student, was certified as a Republican poll watcher and videotaped his peaceful encounter with the new Black Panthers.
I know they are radicals of a radical party. They are complete and utter outliers, and people like that will certainly exist in the...
Now, notice how CNN is trying to portray this as peaceful because CNN is a liberal media outlet.
United States and elsewhere around the world. But what were they doing there? I have no idea.
Others thought they knew. At 12:41 p.m. Eastern Time that day, the Drudge Report's top-linked...
So CNN's claiming that the new Black Panthers were peacefully just watching the polls, right? Let's see how peacefully they were watching the polls by how they're dehumanizing white Americans.
Black Panthers from voter intimidation charges. The head of the group now with these kind words.
I hate white people. All of them. Every last iota of a cracker. I hate it. You want freedom? You're going to have to kill some crackers. You're going to have to kill some of their babies.
Does that sound like peaceful watching of the polls? Let's watch that again.
Hate white people. All of them. Every last iota of a cracker. I hate it. You want freedom? You're going to have to kill some crackers. You're going to have to kill some of their babies.
Let's watch that again. With the transcript turned on. I want the transcript turned on. I want you to follow that. Does this look like peaceful watching of the polls?
All of them. Every last iota of a cracker.
Words.
I hate white people. All of them. Every last iota of a cracker. I hate it. You want freedom? You're going to have to kill some crackers. You're going to have to kill some of their babies.
Okay.
So I'm going to try and work my way down to where Unapologetic Canadian, aka Leaf, refers to Mary as a quote-unquote subhuman. This is just her harassing me, primarily. Harassing me. This is her talking to Mary. This is her referring to a mentally ill woman as a pussy. This is her referring to her as a subhuman. So keep in mind, she is attempting to dehumanize Mary. She is trying to dehumanize a mentally ill woman that has lost her younger brother. She has lost her disabled younger brother, who was disabled because her father abused her mother, and they try to convince her that her family didn't abuse her and all this stuff. So let's look at Mary's community tab. I want to show this to show you the level of abuse that they put her through. Okay, this is her younger disabled brother, Adonis, who is the boyfriend of Unapologetic Canadian, aka Leaf, raised with a fundraiser $1,500 to urinate on her brother's grave, to desecrate the grave. This is them, okay, this is them exploiting him again for a fundraiser. Okay. This is Adonis Paul as Blunt Stream harassing her. This is Adonis Paul harassing her again. Okay. And she's explaining he has 1 million accounts, and he does. He makes up millions and millions of accounts. Okay, and now I'm going to show Adonis Paul bragging that Mary's suffering. Him exploiting Mary's suffering. Now, he tells Mary that she's stalking him, but yet he exploits her suffering to run these fundraisers and then uses them to go on vacation to Cancun to take unapologetic Canadian to Cancun. Okay, let's see if I can get down to that. So, yep, okay, he's obsessed with me. This is him making light of the fact that he's a predator and saying that because Mary called him a predator, now he's going to have to murder cats. Okay, this is him saying he wants to murder a baby bunny now. He's making light of the fact that she called him a predator. This is him again harassing Mary over her brother, now, the brother's name was Bubba. She can't stop, blah, blah, blah. Okay, let's get down here. Now, this is Greg Garilmo did a fundraiser to raise money to dehumanize her brother and to dehumanize her. Goes down quite a ways. Bubba became a valuable... He just keeps harassing her. This is him bothering with me. This is him harassing her again. Hatman. This is him bragging about taking his girlfriend, unapologetic Canadian, to a resort, but yet they're on a resort, but they can't stop harassing Mary and I. Let's see here. Greg Garilmo. As you can see, this guy's obsessed with two people, me and Mary. Me and Mary. See, this is him trying to dehumanize me by claiming I'm a child stalker when I'm not. Okay, if you don't... Okay. He claims I'm a high school dropout, which is hilarious. I'm not. I have a diploma, and I also have a bunch of college that he doesn't have because he lacks the self-control to succeed in academia. This is him bragging that the FBI won't take Mary and I seriously. Okay, this is Adonis claiming that him exploiting his dehumanization of me and Mary. Now, mind you, this is somebody that claims that Mary is stalking him. Okay, so he's saying, just wanted to say thanks to James Robert Clark III and Adrasdea, which is Mary, the Dream Team duo who brought dinner and this view. Yes, I'm going to take the time to rub it in every single day. I told you two to leave me alone. Yeah, you told us to leave you alone while you're actively harassing us via email, via other things, in the comments section of our videos under numerous false accounts and having your viewers do it. You didn't tell me to leave you alone. You actually didn't tell me to leave you alone. If you did, I must have missed it in between all of your harassment and false accusations about me. And you have to understand, when somebody is making false accusations about you like you do about Mary and I, how are we going to leave you alone? And as I pointed out, this is the man that had threatened to harm Mary. I showed that. Okay, this is him still talking about it. And I'm going to show where he threatens to harm Mary. So I wanted to quickly show Adonis Paul threatening Mary. That's him on the top there. Let's watch this.
McBride's property. Dead to rights, you fat... I'm not, you know what? I don't want Royce to get in trouble for stuff I'm going to say. Okay. Dead to rights, you fucking liar.
At the time, Mr. McBride entered the guilty plea. Defendant's proposed jury proposes the following, which was in. Okay.
Is that no? I'm not Ricada.
Now, I want to be clear. He has more recently stated that he never said that Mary committed this crime. Now, this is proof of him saying that she allegedly committed that crime. She did not commit that crime. This is them trying to dehumanize her by calling her a murderer when she's not a murderer. He has backpedaled. He has said that he never said that. Okay, let's see what he said.
Little screenshot, the little tidbit from my upcoming video.
Of course.
And if we could just read that again, because before we watch the rest of this, I want to make sure we're all fucking clear on what Mary did and got off for.
Now, keep that in mind. He's saying here that she did it and got away with it, when now he is saying that she didn't do it. But let's see that again. So he's claiming that she did something that she didn't do to dehumanize her, but now, in modern times, he's saying she didn't do it.
On what Mary did and got off for.
Now, let's watch Adonis, the gentleman on top. Let's watch his reaction to this. Let's watch his reaction to his own lies, trying to dehumanize this poor woman.
First one, the 4 and 5. While the testimonies to the events that followed differ somewhat between Miss Barone and Mr. McBride, it is evident that together... Oh, this is the one. It is evident that together they took the steps to conceal the death.
Now this, what you have to understand, this has to do with exactly, they're making up a story. Just like they made up false criminal records about me, the public unfortunately doesn't look anything up. But these assholes just make shit up and tell their audiences to dehumanize their victims so that it justifies the attacks that their viewers do to us, such as slashing my tire and harassing me in real life. Okay, so that's what goes on. And if it continues to go on, it will be continued to be reported to the police, just like they contacted Mary's therapist to try and get her to lose her therapy, and just like they contacted the hospital that I was in to try and make the hospital think that I was some sort of predator when I'm not.
Of Miss Laws as evidence by testimony. Miss Laws was buried in the backyard of McBride's property.
Mary was not involved in this. Virgie sent me the police report. Mary was only referred to as a witness. She was never referred to as a suspect. They are pulling this out of their ass. This is completely imaginary, and they made it up to dehumanize Mary.
Dead to rights, you fat... I'm not, you know what? I don't want Royce to get in trouble for stuff I'm going to say. Okay. Dead to rights, you fucking liar.
At the time Mr. McBride entered the guilty plea, he indicated to the court that this was something he had been thinking about for a couple weeks.
Exactly. He had been thinking about it for a couple of weeks.
There is nothing in his testimony that would suggest he was actually planning to kill Miss Laws during the time. This killing happened after a heated argument with his girlfriend.
And do you know what them letting her off mean?
Do you know that him having a heated argument that put him in an emotional state that allowed him to go kill somebody, that justified him killing somebody, does not mean that the person that he was arguing with did anything. It means that he's a fucking psycho and is in prison where he belongs.
Royce, they couldn't get a murder one charge and put this fucking pet in prison.
Now this is all of their theory. No, they couldn't do anything to Mary because Mary didn't do anything. Okay? The guy that did the stuff is in prison, and then you assholes claim that you were contacting him to get him let out of prison and basically told Mary that he was going to hurt her and you were going to get him let out of prison. Now, mind you, that guy actually is a child sex offender. He has offended against children. You claimed that you wanted to raise money to get him legal defense to get him out of prison so that he could hurt Mary, and told her that to further dehumanize her and further mess with her head, knowing that she has schizoaffective disorder.
Murder and kill him, and like he deserves to be killed. And the DA in this case is fucking based. Yeah. All right, she went after Trayvon.
If she's so based, okay, well then why is the dude in prison and not her? Oh, that's because that dude is the one that did the killing. That dude is the one that did everything. You can claim anything you want, you can imagine anything that you want, but you're wrong. Okay, this is why people that watch Law and Order shouldn't see themselves as fucking criminal investigators.
All kinds of shit. I looked her up and all of her shit up too.
Right.
She is all about killing some fucking pets. The DA wanted this motherfucker.
Right.
They wanted McBride. They don't give a shit about Adrasdea. They allowed him.
Yeah, they don't give a shit about her because she's innocent, you fucking moron.
Filed for principal, and they wouldn't have been able to get.
I like how he admits now that she didn't commit a crime, but here he's trying to convince his viewers that she committed a crime. She did not commit a crime.
Murder one on his ass like they wanted. If they put her on the stand and she proved she just talked.
More empty theories. If she really was guilty of anything, they would have been able to get her too, but they couldn't because she didn't do anything. And that's the problem, is you people have all these nice little theories that you make up that are not true, and they're literally created to dehumanize people, and that's what the problem is. Okay? And you shouldn't be doing what you're doing, because it encourages people to commit acts of violence, to commit acts of harassment, and in my case, to harass me in real life and slash my goddamn tire.